Let me show you a dubstep mix I've done and a metal mix I've done so you can decide for yourself whether or not I know what I'm talking about, so you can trust me to tell you the truth. Here's the dubstep one. Here's the rock one. Now that we've got that out the way, hey, I'm Chill Panic. I've been producing dubstep and EDM for the past 11 years. I've also done rock and a bunch of other genres, but EDM is by far the main genre that I've gotten paid to make for clients. And I've realized in this time that there's actually a lot of similarities between metal and dubstep, because dubstep, drums gotta be punchy. Metal drums gotta be punchy. Dubstep, a lot of people that love the genre also make music. Same thing with metal. There's a lot of similarities. I've noticed there are some correlation between mixing techniques that sometimes I steal from the dubstep world to bring into the metal world. So I just wanted to share a couple of those with you. So the very first thing is the kick, snare, bus, clip, limit, transient method. I don't know what to call it. So I've got this super simple drum beat that's just a kick and a snare that I made with samples from my Modern Rock Starter Kit, which you can get for free. It's in the Lizzle in the Disgrizzle. It sounds like this. So I'm just gonna beef that up by doing the kick, snare, bus, clip, transient shape method. But basically you just take your kick and your snare, you route it to one channel, then you throw a soft clipper, and then you just jam that thing into a limiter. There's a bunch of different ways you can go about this. You don't have to like jam it into the limiter. You could jam it into the soft clipper, but that's the basic concept. Putting a clipper and a limiter on a kick, snare, bus. But if you really want to get them heavy, the main thing I always use are transient shapers, but you have to be careful with that with rock, because rock is just, it's not as loud as EDM because you just can't compress it as much on the master. All a transient shaper does is shape the transient. It's almost like a compressor, except the attack, instead of delaying the amount of time it takes for it to start working, it's more like the volume of the actual transient. So if you want it like crazy, you just turn that shit up all the way. I probably wouldn't do that for rock, but you can get some great effects with transient shapers. And sometimes I do that on the snare as well, especially for like rocktronic stuff, because that's really hard to dial down because you're trying to get like the EDM loudness with keeping with some of the mixing rules of rock. And a lot of times a rock snare will just get completely buried in a rocktronic song, so I usually do either some saturation or transient shaping on the snare. But the basic concept is just putting your kick and snare into a bus and clipping and limiting it together. Thing number 2 is rapid sidechain. So with dubstep, oftentimes you have this kick, which is just punching you in the gut, and then you have a really loud sub bass as well. So it's really important to duck out the sub bass every time the kick hits, but you always want the sub bass to come back as quickly as possible, so it's only gone while the kick is there, and then it can come right back, so your low end is constant and heavy. And for metal, you also want a constant low end. So let's try applying this to like a bass guitar. Now there are a bunch of different ways to sidechain. One is called track spacer, which is more of like a sidechain EQ, but I'm just gonna go over the basic like volume. What I use is Shaperbox, and there's a bunch of different plugins like this, but I'm just gonna do the MIDI trigger on, and I do a shape kind of like this, but you can really do this in any type of volume shaping plugin. And then what I'll do is take a MIDI out, so I just have a MIDI trigger and I copy the MIDI from the kick. And then what that is gonna do is tell Shaperbox that every time the kick comes in to duck out the volume. But with metal or rock, you probably wouldn't want it that drastic. And you can also get some cool effects by using sidechain as almost like a rhythmic element. But I'm honestly way better with dubstep mixing than I am metal. I don't know how much that is really used, but I think it could come in handy for you. Okay, now this is a really interesting one. Okay, so with dubstep, there's one genre, the genre I've done the most, which is called melodic dubstep. It sounds like this. in melodic dubstep, you have a mid bass and then you have a super saw stack. Let me show you what that is. So this is a mid bass. This is a super saw. And basically, the super saw is like your guitar. And then the mid bass is just like a bass guitar. Strictly like mixing wise. And a lot of the time, what really makes your chords sound good is making sure that your bass is right, because the bass is going to take up a lot of the low mids and a lot of the mids too. That's why it's called a mid bass. So the way that your chords sound, how big they're going to sound, is greatly going to be determined by your actual bass. And I feel like it's the same in rock, because your bass and your guitar are mixed together almost as like one instrument rather than separate things. And the tone of your bass is gonna greatly determine the tone of your guitar. Like having a lot of clank in the like 1000 to 2000 range with a bass is gonna determine how you EQ the guitar. And I plan on doing another video really soon going into everything about guitars and basses, but that's the gist. Number 4, use way more layers than you think you need. Whenever I'm producing dubstep, for instance, those like saw stacks, those super saws and things like that, or leads, like a lot of the times people have like 5, 15, 20 different layers to make one sound, especially if you make stuff like modern metalcore, like Dayseeker or something like that. They have tons of layers in their stuff. Knocked Loose even. I broke down a video that Rob Scallon did with the guitarist from Knocked Loose, Isaac Hale. He was talking about how many different layers of crazy effects they have. So the way to put this in action, I would just like, if you have a song right now that you're working on, just try adding different layers. If you have a synth that's doing a lead, try stacking like 10 more, like quiet layers sort of in the background, and EQ them differently and see how it makes your sound. Or try putting pad layers behind your guitars, especially for choruses. So number 5, the last one, sub separation. And you don't have to do this every time, it's not necessary, but 90% of the time when I'm producing dubstep, I have like my actual bass layer, like the bass that's really heard, and then I have a sub bass layer which is more felt. And that's why even in plugins like Serum, they have a sub oscillator that has a direct out, so that you can do a bunch of effects on these oscillators and then high pass it, and then you have your sub going directly out to the mixer track, and then you can compress them together. So sometimes in the past, I've even high passed a bass guitar and put a synth bass under it, because if your sub is completely separate from your main bass, then you can really push it and get it loud and constant without fucking up the core sound of your actual bass.